The Parsha describes how the Jewish people used to camp in the desert for the 40 years that they were in the desert, and it says, Al pi Hashem yachanu v'al pi Hashem yisou, that when it was time to travel, they knew so because God would indicate to them it's time to travel. The cloud would start moving. There was a cloud that was parked above the tabernacle in the desert. It would start moving. That would mean it's time to start moving. And when it would stop, that would mean it was time to camp. And that was according to the word of God. It was time to move. It was time to go. It was time to camp. The Slonim Rebbe learns from here that this is not only a historical accounting, but rather it's a directive in life. That in life we have to make our movement and our camping according to the way of God. And the way he explains it is that sometimes we're in a time of growth, of movement, of improvement, where we can see that we're growing, we can see that we're moving, we can see that life is sort of going according to the way we need it to go for us to be improving and gaining and growing in our spirituality, in our Judaism, in our observance, in our connection with the Almighty. And that's certain periods of time. That's the time when we're growing. We grow according to the way of God. We're going. And sometimes we're kind of stopped. We're kind of camped. We're kind of not moving. And that refers to the difficult times where we don't see ourselves growing. We don't see ourselves with the conditions that allow us to grow. We're kind of stuck, and we feel like we're stuck. But even then, the Torah is giving us a directive that it should be al pi Hashem. We should realize that even in these difficult times where we don't see necessarily the road ahead, we don't see ourselves necessarily making progress, we have to realize that here the responsibility is not necessarily to grow in tangible numbers, but rather it's to hold on and stay strong during the difficult times. That's the al pi Hashem yachanu. Stay camped, stay in one place, but do it according to the will of God. Stay strong with your commitment. And don't drop it. Don't lose what you have. Kind of stay strong with what you do have. There's this story I heard from a friend of mine about Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky. I actually had the pleasure of getting to know him a little bit. He was a great speaker, an amazing speaker. He lived in Bnei Brak in Israel. An old man. He was around, I don't know, maybe 4.5 feet tall. He was very, very short. But he was an amazing speaker. He really had a ton of personality. Anyways, he had a story as follows. When he was, he was an older man, older gentleman, Rosh Hashiva. He ran an institution, and he was living in Bnei Brak in Israel, and he kind of met up with an old friend of his by the name of Yitzchak, who he kind of grew up with in Europe, and they went their own ways, and they wound up in Israel many years later, and they had a conversation. It turns out that Yitzchak was no longer observant. He had kind of had gone through some hard times and kind of just gave up the whole religious thing, and went on and lived his life. And now he was an older gentleman, and they kind of we were talking and recounting all old stories about how they grew up and whatever. And Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky said, "Hey, why don't you come over for a Shabbat meal? Why don't you come join us Friday night for a meal, and we can kind of talk over the meal." And he said, okay. He was willing to take him up on it. And anyway, comes Friday night, and Yaakov Galinsky's waiting there at his meal and waiting for his guest, and he doesn't show up. And he waits, a little while, waits an hour. No one comes, so he goes on, has the meal on his own. He waits, maybe he'll come the next morning. He also didn't come Shabbat morning. He didn't come at all. And after Shabbos, Sunday morning, he gets a phone call from his friend. And he asks him, Yitzchak, why didn't you come? We were waiting for you. And he says, actually, I did come. He's like, you came? Where were you? He says, well, actually, here's the story. I came Friday night, and I came into the community, and I hadn't been in Bnei Brak, maybe ever. And I saw this community. I was just standing there. I stood there on the sidewalk just watching. I couldn't get over what I was seeing. I see these, families, fathers and sons heading to shul, and like there was these smiles on their faces, these radiating kind of expressions on their way to the shul, like in the olden days. And now I'm walking down the streets, just taking it all in, seeing the kids playing on the street, seeing the mothers lighting the Shabbos candles in the windows, and just seeing their prayers, and it just brought back these emotions. I just started crying from watching all this. And then I passed by the shul, the synagogue, and I hear the singing, and it just reminded me of the old tunes, from the olden days. And I was sitting there, and I was just reflecting, on my life and what I've given up, and the life, I was raised with this. I grew up with this, and look what I gave up. Look what happiness, what joy I gave up. to live the life that I chose for myself, and I couldn't bring myself to come to the meal. It was just too much. I would just break down. I wouldn't be able to enjoy myself, So I didn't end up coming. And he said, I thought when I made my decision, to leave observance, to leave a life of Judaism, I thought okay, I'm giving up the world to come, but at least I'm going to have myself Olam Hazeh. I'm going to have this world at least, I want to have a good world. I had a rough time. I had a rough experience. At least let me live, a good this world. Next world, okay, I'll give up on that. And, after seeing what I saw, I realized, I didn't give up the world to come. I gave up my Olam Hazeh. I gave up this world. I gave it all up. And I realized, that's when I lost it all. And that was the lesson. Rav Yaakov Linsky writes about how, the lesson he learned from his old friend is that, times get hard. Make sure to hold on. Don't lose what you have. Make sure you hang on to it, because, these are the tough times. You hang on to them, you grow exponentially from that. But if you drop it, you lose everything. Take care. Have a great Shabbos.